So thank you all for being here. That's just a short version of, what I'm up to. I love mainly landscape or really any kind of photography except for people, weddings, portraits. Um, I did all those back in the day and I just have no interest in it. I love being outdoors. If you follow me on Facebook, my new thing is I'm trying really hard to be an excellent macro bug photographer. I'm fascinated by bugs, and I'm sure, I don't know if anyone else does it, I'm sure I'm going to go blind, with some of these bugs that are so tiny. But that's a whole other story. So, but I love just about anything nature, and I love rust and abandon. So I'm a pretty good mix there as well. But tonight we're going to talk about shutter speeds and how to use that more creatively. I obviously don't know everyone's background and whether you're all pros. I saw some, in the thing, some great shots from amusement rides and that, which you'll see a couple. But just to kind of give a quick, intro into it. So shutter speed is obviously one part of the exposure triangle, along with aperture and ISO. And I think as landscape photographers, if that's what most of you guys are, we tend to, gravitate more towards aperture and depth of field, and maybe pay a little less attention to shutter speed unless maybe you're a sports photographer. But I think that is really a missing link in a way that you could, become maybe a little more creative with some of your images. So shutter speed is really how fast the curtain opens and closes in your camera. And it's how much light is then going to strike the sensor or the film if somebody's still shooting film. So the key to capturing motion is obviously your shutter speed. And there are lots of creative techniques for that. I'm going to go through a couple. Generally speaking, and this could be, whatever you want it to be, but I'm going to say that most people consider a slower shutter speed anything from a 30th of a second on down to however long, and maybe a faster shutter speed at about 1/250th of a second or 1/500th and faster. And so then those shutter speeds kind of between are kind of the middle of the road, the average that your cell phone might take, or if your camera was in program, that's kind of the middle of the road shutter speeds. So I'm going to talk about motion and using shutter speeds in 3 different genres, maybe. We're going to look at freezing motion, conveying motion, and then kind of a mix between the two, which is panning. So I'm going to get started right here. All right. So, and I decided I wanted to run through Lightroom because since it's about shutter speed, I figured you might want to see, what the settings were. So we're going to get started here. For some of my very first shots, has anyone ever taken a picture like this where you didn't really want a blurry animal or something, but suddenly there was motion and you had the wrong shutter speed going on? So in this case, I was photographing this mandrill, I believe. And all of a sudden he started shaking his head back and forth. And at the slow shutter speed, I got this motion, but it's kind of neat and very different. As you can tell, obviously, that he is moving. And here's another one first. I like to shoot sports. I live right near the Reading Phillies. And first picture of the night, hadn't even really checked things. And I'm on a slower shutter speed. But it's kind of different, right, than what you see, because at a 2/50th of a second, the guy's pitching so fast that we've got a little motion there. So we're going to go through all kinds of examples. And one other thing that was a complete, if you like it, I'll call it serendipity, or you could say that's a really stupid image. But I was down at Middle Creek photographing the full moonrise kind of over the lake and at a slower shutter speed. And all of a sudden, all these snow geese started flying by. And so they're obviously a little blurry there. But sometimes that can be a neat effect. All right, why did we stop moving? And a couple more quick examples. If you've ever been out on a windy day, and it has been pretty windy lately, you may end up, noticing if you look closely that your flowers have some motion blur in them. And generally we don't want that, you know, we want them sharp. So in this case, I was at a 1/6 of a second, just kind of shooting this flower field in Texas, and had to crank up because of the wind up to 1/25 of a second just to help freeze, and obviously to wait till the gusts stopped. So I want to go through a series. I don't know how many people like waterfalls. I'm just using waterfalls here as an example. I personally love smooth water, so the slower shutter speeds. Some people like them faster, but for teaching, I did this whole series starting at 1 second here, and then going a little bit faster. So you can get, if you've never, you know, kind of played with shutter speed, you can get an idea of a waterfall, which is, this is Dingman's Falls up in the Delaware Water Gap, how you could render that differently. So we have 1 second, half a second, quarter second. So I'm moving by a full stop each time. An eighth, and you start to see a little more detail now in the water. 1/15th, and now we're getting into the area where I don't like how it looks at all. A 30th of a second, again, personal preference. And now we're starting to kind of freeze the water a little bit. So at a 60th, 1/25th, now we're starting to see droplets, and going faster. So 2/50th, 500th. I think that was as fast as I went. So, you know, some water you might want to freeze, some you might want to keep it, you know, slower. For me personally, with waterfalls, I probably will shoot them at slower speeds, and I'll have some other examples. But here's a good example. I'm at this pretty stream, and I'm just at 1/8 of a second, you know, nothing, I'm on a tripod, nothing really appeared to be moving at first. But when I did a longer shutter speed, I noticed that there was motion in the water. And how many of you love doing swirlies in water? So for me, I think it's a fun thing. So I'm always looking to see if there is any kind of motion in water. So the first shot was at an eighth of a second, but now here I am at a 50 seconds, almost a full minute to get this swirl. Here's a shot just of a guitar player, obviously, and at a 1/60th of a second, his hands are mostly sharp. But what if I want to show that differently and maybe a little more artistically? Well, I could slow down the shutter speed, and this is obviously a different guitar player, and now you can see the motion, and that shows that he's actually strumming the guitar, and that was at about a 13th of a second. And then here's just a cell phone shot from one evening when I was photographing a sunset, just so you could get an idea what the water looked like basically to your eye. But another way that I love to photograph water is with a really long shutter speed, which will, you know, totally smooth out the water, especially if there's any wind. It just gives it like this glass feel. So, and generally to do that, you will probably be at about a 20th of a second or longer. And if you've never done this type of photography, you will likely need to use a neutral density filter to cut down some of your light so you can get this longer shutter speed. So for me, I had a polarizer on and a 6-stop neutral density to get this. And, you know, going on with, these are kind of an artistic choice. Here's water splashing up on a pier. I used a very fast shutter speed, froze every little droplet at a 1,000th of a second. And, you know, doing this backlit, you could see those droplets better. But here I'm capturing wave action at 1.3 seconds, and you have that nice, soft, kind of moody look to it. So again, how you choose to convey motion in your images is really our artistic choice, and that's up to you. And hopefully I'll have some things that will inspire you here to try something maybe that you haven't tried before. So here are a few examples now for you know, some longer exposures where the water was smoothed out, 13 seconds. And let me backtrack too. You know, don't just make note of shutter speed if you like an image. The shutter speed and the effect really are based on the motion in the water. So if you have a pretty calm lake as it was this night, you don't need a very long shutter speed. But if you have, choppy waves, you would need a lot longer shutter speed to help smooth that out. So here's just a couple more examples for artistic choice. So, you could tell me in the comments, what does this image, what kind of mood does that give you? Like, does that feel soft and peaceful, or does it feel like, man, it's a blizzard or something going on? So I shot this image at a 2/50th of a second to kind of freeze the snowflakes in the air. And then this one, I used a much slower shutter speed so you can see the motion as the snow's coming down. And I think this one at a 50th of a second really gives the impression that it is really, as they say in England, kind of chucking it down, and really kind of a blizzard going on. So again, your shutter speed totally can make a difference in the mood of your image. And here's one more, just nice and soft, at a 1/60th of a second. It almost has a painterly effect. And then here's one where I shot again at a faster shutter speed, and all the little snow, almost said snowdrops, but flakes are frozen in the air. So next time you're out, try both ways. But here, let's talk about freezing action. So if you're doing something like pro sports with Rafael Nadal, you're going to need a pretty fast shutter speed. So even at an 800th of a second, that ball is not totally frozen. There's a little bit of softness here. You're kind of freezing him, but there is still some motion. Now, for pro baseball, and this is again the Reading Phillies, we're always trying. I do a workshop at the Phillies, and we're like, let's get dirt. We want to freeze dirt in the air. So being at least at a 400th of a second, you get that pretty cool effect as he's sliding in of the dirt exploding in the air. There's another one. This one was at 1,000th of a second. And if you're doing sports, it's a little harder if you start, like, once the sun sets and you start losing light, you're really going to have to crank up your ISO to be able to get some of these faster shutter speeds. But like here, it was still daylight, so I'm at 1/800th of a second to freeze action. We had to play, and just letting it rip on continuous drive then can give you this whole series, and it's all, you got this guy frozen in the air, which is pretty funny. He obviously did not make the play. All right, a little more dirt there. So, if you were shooting, say, your kid's baseball game, little league, t-ball, you obviously would not need 1,000th of a second or, an 800th or anything to freeze the action. But when you have faster action, then you absolutely do. And next time you're shooting any kind of sports or moving subject, maybe play with some different shutter speeds and see how that is rendering the motion. If you want to be in flight, this guy, 12/50th of a second out in bright sunlight. And I didn't.
Valerie, in those baseball pictures, were you in the stands?
I was not. So I can get press passes. So when I lead a workshop there, I get us press passes, and here I'm shooting at the third base line, and we'll rotate back and forth between the first and the third. And then anywhere else we want to sit. So a lot of times we'll shoot from behind home plate too and get the pitcher pitching right at you and everything. So I'm right at the fence, the side of the dugout at third base, or first in this case. But yeah, I now use a flash for all my insect shots, but in this case, it was just freezing the action with a fast shutter speed to get that bee in flight. And then this bird, coming in for a landing on these turtles. So about an 800th of a second would freeze that. And again, this was at a 2,000th of a second. If you've ever been to Ocean City, New Jersey at the Rookery, you can get some fantastic shots there. And this was just, following this bird. He looks like an umbrella kind of floating over the next guys. blue heron. And then, so I don't know if any of you guys, I'm not a huge birder. I go when other people are going. What I like to play once a year when the snow geese show up at Middle Creek. And so here shooting at a faster shutter speed, an 800th of a second, helps to freeze all the birds in flight there. Here dropping a strawberry into some carbonated water. You can kind of see this is cropped a lot, so it got a little pixelated, but you know, all the bubbles in the water.
Valerie,
Uh-huh.
for that one picture that you took of the bird, a couple back, you were actually
This one?
panning, weren't you?
This
Back.
one right here?
No, before that. That one. Were you panning?
I was not. So you can see the background is mostly sharp.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
I
it's
mean
just
the next one, the blue heron. Were you
I probably
panning there?
did. I was moving a little with him,
Okay.
but you don't see as much, and we'll go through this when I go through panning shots, but you don't see much of a blur in the background because it's such a fast shutter speed. So in
Okay.
order to show a nice blur, you would be using a slower shutter speed. So we'll get to that, but good catch, because yes, there is definitely the blur in the background there.
Okay,
I
thanks.
got all excited when he came out and I took like 500 shots of him flying all around. So I do like the blue heron, little blue. He's pretty fun. But, and okay, so Middle Creek, when I see that it's going to be 1,000, how many? 10,000, 100,000? Oh, over 100,000 is usually when I'll make my trek down there. I'm pretty picky with that. So there's a place called the Velodrome, which is the Valley Preferred Cycle Center, and it's up near Allentown. And I also like to lead workshops here because this is a great place also to get people to understand shutter speed. And so in the early part of the race, and you have the sun, you have the really neat shadows, you could shoot at an 8,000th of a second, and you're freezing them. Now they're racing around the track, but you're freezing them as if they're just standing still. These guys coming right at the finish line, 800th of a second. Again, that's fast enough to freeze these pro cyclists. Excuse me. The bee at an 800th, he can be frozen. And even, if you have a duck kind of doing his thing and splashing his water around, drying off his wings, just use a fast shutter speed sometime and you can get a pretty creative looking shot. So this is 1/500th of a second. And then this duck of some sort taking off. And again, at a really fast shutter speed, you're freezing all the little droplets of the water. So now let's start shifting. So here's again a sharp shot, 2,000th of a second of these snow geese at Middle Creek. But now let's try and be a little creative. So if we use a slow shutter speed, like around a 1/25th of a second, maybe a 30th of a second, then you get this soft blur, and it can be a pretty neat effect. And it's a lot easier maybe to get shots this way than trying to freeze them when they're in action. But if you've never done that, maybe you want to try it, especially if there's a whole bunch of the birds. I just think that's kind of a neat, very painterly effect. Moving with conveying motion. So, car trails are a nice subject if you're shooting a slow shutter speed. So here I'm in Niagara at whatever, Clifton Hill, I think it's called. And an 8-second exposure rendered all the people that were moving, so they're blurry, but this one lady was just kind of standing still on her phone, and so she's sharp. And that's a fun way to do some people photography when you're in, maybe at a fair. I'll have some examples, or other kind of city areas where you can be a little more artistic with a slower shutter speed. Obviously choosing a slower shutter speed here shows that it was windy this night. You can use a slow shutter speed for fun on a little train set. So up at Longwood Garden at Christmas, slow it down. Another one here where you just have the, the train streaking by, and that gives the impression that it's moving very fast when you use a slower shutter speed, which is kind of interesting.
Valerie, on the
Uh-huh.
picture before this, how do you explain to people that you wanted the train blurred rather than you took the picture of it and it turned out blurred?
Well, if people want to argue about something, I mean, I did it on purpose. That's one of the things that I like to teach. Again, it's just setting up there, we're on a tripod, and then we just try a whole bunch of different shutter speeds because I want to show that the train is in motion. If you shot this at maybe a 1/100th of a second, the train would be frozen because it doesn't go that fast. And then it would look like it's just sitting on the track. So I want to show that this train is on the move.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah. And then obviously slower, so I have a lot more blur with this train. There's actually a train up here on the upper track and the lower, and that slower shutter speed just really shows the motion compared to the 40th of a second here. For me, whenever I'm out shooting, I'm trying to do something a little bit different than what our eye sees and what your average person is going to shoot. And so playing around with shutter speeds is a great way to, kind of come away with maybe a more compelling image. So this is the Metro in DC, I believe. And I just, set up there with a slow shutter speed, 2.5 seconds as the Metro was flying by. And, that really gives the impression that it was flying fast. 1.6 seconds here. And here we were in, one of the beach towns in New Jersey. I liked this mural. We were kind of photographing the murals, and a jogger was coming by. So I slowed down my shutter speed so that I would have him in motion against that background. If you go too much slower, then he would kind of disappear. So you kind of need around a 10th, maybe a 15th. And again, that depends on how fast the motion is. Here we were at some festival at Hopewell Village, which is a historic site, and they were doing yarn spinning. And so I wanted to do it different. So I used what was, at 100th of a second, that's not a slow shutter speed, but it's slow for what would be needed to freeze this wheel in motion. So to show the motion. And I thought that was a more creative image. When I lived in Michigan, I was in the state capitol, and I just set up for I love architecture, and I just set up for a shot down in this basement. And all of a sudden, this whole school bus full of children on a tour came in, and they were loud and it was echoing and they were there forever. And I'm allergic to children, and I'm just kind of waiting like this. And then I thought, well, why not, play with this? So using a really long shutter speed, which is a little over 3 seconds, I got all the kids in motion. And to me, that kind of conveys the chaos that I was feeling, as this quiet room became this loud echo chamber. And then you don't get in trouble, photographing kids maybe if they're totally blurred. Same lines, we're at the Jersey Shore. I've, got my camera on a tripod, and I'm just choosing to use a slow shutter speed to show motion or the blur of people as they're walking by. So they kind of all will look like ghosts. This was a 10-second exposure. This one was now it's at night, and this was only a 1/2 second exposure at the fair, to show, the motion of the people walking by. And again, if you have anybody standing still, like this person over here, this person kind of right there, it's kind of a neat effect where you have some that are sharp and some that are blurry. And then if you guys have ever been up to Eastern State Penitentiary, the place is supposed to be one of the most haunted places in the country. And so I wanted to convey that with my image. And so I wanted the people to look like ghosts. So I used a slower shutter speed here, 6 seconds, to give that motion and give it the effect that there are ghosts wandering the halls. I personally have never seen ghosts wandering the halls. And this was just a funny moment, I was in this doorway also at ESP, and I was shooting, through the arches. And there had been, I don't know, some camera club there or something. It was one of the nights when you could bring your lights and everything. And so this guy came through and he's holding, a big umbrella on the light stand and everything. And he lost his group totally. And if you've ever been here, there's all these different hallways. And so he's just walking in circles. And I'm like, oh, come on, buddy, get out of my shot. And when I looked, he looked like a ghost coming through the image because I was in the midst of a long exposure. So that turned out kind of neat. If you've ever gone to Longwood, they usually have a Christmas tree in the conservatory that's in motion if you look very carefully. And usually it's just moving very slowly. So my first couple of images were like a blur because there was motion. So I decided to, really accentuate that by doing a 30-second exposure. And this was during the day, for those few minutes that you're allowed to use a tripod before you get chased. And this is a restaurant in Morgantown, if you ever come up that way, and it has a windmill on the roof. And I noticed that the windmill was spinning. And so I just, happened to have my tripod with me and just decided to do a long exposure. And it almost looks like the radioactive symbol, I guess. So it's 6 seconds. And also then that was long enough to kind of start picking up some stars as well. So, I just like to play. I just like to have fun with that. Speaking of playing, so I'm at a fair and there's the little rubber duckies that you can pick up to win a prize. So I set up and used the slow shutter speed, 1/6 of a second, so you could see the motion of them going around, and then a longer shutter speed of 8 seconds really makes them look like they're cruising, right? So see the difference, in just using your shutter speed, the difference that can make and what it conveys in the image. And then I thought this was kind of fun, getting in closer on stop and them all in motion. So again, just have a play. It's, you can never know what you'll come away with if you don't try. And it's a great way to gain a greater understanding of, shutter speeds and motion. Also at a fair ride, so I love amusement rides. In this case, the wild mouse, that goes pretty fast, right? And if you shoot it at a regular shutter speed, you're going to freeze it and it'll look like it's just sitting there on the track. So using a slower shutter speed, in this case at a 1/15 of a second, shows that blur. I did some that were longer, like a whole second, but the car, just disappeared from the track. So it's just a matter of playing with different shutter speeds to see what effect you like the best. And then also at that track, I like to show, motion with the group. So we set up and we just focus on the back billboard and then just wait. And as the riders come flying by, then we just start shooting. And anywhere from like a 30th of a second, a 40th, maybe even a 20th can give some pretty neat effects. And it just gives the impression that the racers really are in motion. And because you'd never, like if you tried to focus on them, you'd really have trouble. We just, again, focus either on the billboard or you could focus on like one of the lines right where they're going to cross and just fire, and don't follow them or anything, just shoot as they're going by. And this was kind of a mixture of, a little moving back and forth with them, a little bit of panning. 60th, too slow to really freeze them. So now, Gene, what we were talking about. So now these are panning examples. So panning is kind of a mixture between the two, between freezing the action and showing motion. So if you want your, in this case, riders to be sharp, but you want a blurred background so it gives, more impact to the image, what you need to do is you pick a slower shutter speed. So in this case, it was a 50th of a second. But the real trick, if you've never done it, is you follow the motion with your camera and you pick them up and get them in focus kind of way before you're going to shoot. And then just once they're in focus, just start shooting, and you have to stay steady with them. And you try not to get ahead of them, not be too slow, but stay right at the same speed with them. and then just finish your motion, and you can get some pretty neat effects. And it takes a lot of practice. This night, which we only shot for about 2.5 hours, I had over 1,700 images, because you'll take a ton for panning, and most of them will be blurry and thrown away. So, but this is that effect, and I think it looks really cool. And then that really helps you to feel like they're in motion. Sometimes when you have multiple riders at their different distances, one hopefully will be sharp and then the rest will be a little blurry, kind of in this case. So it is important that you do lock focus on a rider before you start, flying with the camera. I just, this is at 60th. So most of these guys are going pretty fast. So you could, do this at a 60th of a second. But I just really like the look. This was on a turn. So I'm having to do like this little kind of scoop, which is even harder in a group. And this is a little slower. So now there's more blur in the rider. Which, still conveys a lot of motion. So you have to decide whether you want them a little sharper, like this is at 100th, or, if you don't mind some blur in your riders. You can do this with anything moving. So with this motorcycle, I had a friend of mine when I was getting ready for a different class, just driving by, did the panning on that again in a 60th of a second. She wasn't going very fast. This was a guy out on the street. And it could have been maybe a little faster to get his face sharp as well. You can do this with horses, which is pretty neat. The harder part, and in this case, I used an even slower shutter speed. So you have more of a blur in the horse as well, but the rider is bouncing a little bit. So it's even a little more challenge to get, a pretty good shot. So this first one was at a 15th of a second. You can definitely see some blur even in the horse, even though I'm following it. And then, this one at an 80th of a second. So, maybe a little sharper. And then this last set, I don't know, I think merry-go-rounds are all outlawed, but when we were kids, we were allowed to go flying and fall off and land on our heads. So I thought I would try something here where I'm sitting on the merry-go-round opposite my nieces and nephew, and grandma is spinning us. And so as long as I'm at the same speed as them, which I am on the same ride, and just using a slower shutter speed at an 1/8, so everything on the back is blurring. And it looks like, my niece is just about to fly off. But, it wasn't going that fast, but it's a really fun shot. You could try and do this if you're on the swings, maybe some other rides for kids. And then here we put grandma on there and the kids are bouncing up and down. And it's just a fun way to get some pictures, especially if you have kids or nieces and nephews or whatever. And then here's a couple examples. I don't know how many of you, I know a lot of you go up to Longwood Gardens. I love the night fountain show. I just love the colors. I love everything about it. And it's always a challenge, like what shutter speed do I want to use? That shows it the best. So too fast and you're freezing the water, and I don't like the looks of that. So maybe the 40th of a second might be one of the fastest shutter speeds I use. And you have this little bit of motion frozen, but still a lot of blur. Here's a little bit slower. This is a 1/10 of a second. So you have really soft water, but it's still a little bit frozen. It's not completely soft. You can see here where there's like some water hitting the other fountain, that you got this little spritz, which is kind of neat. So I really like this shutter speed. And I'll tell you, if you ever go, one of the neatest things is when the show is over, they keep the lights on and the fountain's going for about 15-20 minutes yet. Race up to the top. I don't shoot up there during the thing because that's like the splash zone, but race up to the top, and they usually don't care if you have a tripod. And then, try and get some shots just as it keeps changing lights and playing around. So a little bit slower, quarter of a second, and it's even softer. And this is probably about where I like to shoot most of the fountain show. I don't know, Gene, if this was the workshop that you were on, but one of the weeks we were caught in a torrential downpour, and we were hiding in the pump house and looking out. The sun came out and the rain was being backlit, and I thought that was pretty cool. So I used the 30th of a second just to show that, downpour. And even, when you have mist and fog, so here, a friend of mine shot this, at a 1/5 of a second, you see a little bit of motion in all that mist coming off the lake, which is kind of a neat effect. If it would have been faster, it would have looked maybe just like frozen clouds. I'm not sure how it would have looked, but I like that effect. And then I don't know if anybody's ever shot fireflies. This was using live composite on the Olympus. So I'm now solely, for a bunch of years, an Olympus shooter. I absolutely love it. And one of the reasons is for this mode where I can actually see this image building and then just decide to stop when, I've got enough fireflies or whatever. So every one of these little yellow swooshes is a little firefly in motion. It wasn't only 1.3 seconds. I think this was over a total of 20 minutes. So the camera was taking a series of 1.3 second exposures.
How many exposures was it? Do you know?
Well, I didn't write it down and I don't know. And that's the one thing that's frustrating is you don't know. Usually I'll take a cell phone image before I turn off, before I, stop the image, but I don't always do that. So, but I do remember that it was probably about 20 minutes. So you can do that divided by 1.3 seconds.
But you can actually see the yellow lines with your camera?
Yeah. Yeah. So live composite is like bulb, where you're leaving the shutter open as long as you want, but you start with a base exposure. So I got a good exposure that I had some, light on the field. This was at dusk, just before sunset, even though it looks a little brighter. And once you start the exposure, the only thing that will record is new light. So as the car trails go in the background, they're recording. And every time a little firefly, does its little thing, that's recording. But my barn, the rest of my landscape is not being overexposed.
Oh, okay. So it's the same as bulb though.
Well, it's like
Or
bulb, except
like-
if I kept bulb open, right, for 20 minutes and I still had light in the sky, this exposure would have been totally blown out.
Oh, okay.
And you can't
True.
see it. So you're just guessing, right? Like, should I stop now? Did I get enough little fireflies? But here I'm actually seeing it as it's building.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So once I bought it, and I'll just do a real quick commercial. Like, I bought the least expensive entry level Olympus a bunch of years ago for hiking. And a friend of mine convinced me to start using this mode. And once I start playing with this, I use it for fireworks, for star trails. You'll see a couple examples. I could not go back. I was a Canon shooter all my life. I tried to love the Canon mirrorless and I sold it within a month because I love these features. So, and just the fact of being able to see it. So here we went to shoot night, stars over top of these crosses at this like retreat center, and it was summer, and I wasn't even really noticing, but again, we have all these little fireflies going on, which is just a really fun addition to the image. So these are also live composite shots where I just set a good exposure for kind of blue hour and then just let it run. So this took a series of 30-second exposures. I let it run for about an hour, and this is what I got. I could have let it run longer. Usually about an hour, if you are not star trail shooter, usually about an hour will give you almost complete lines. But if you want the really nice, smooth, no breaks, you really need like 3 or 4 hours. I like to shoot things whenever I can over top of water, and you get the trails in the water as well. And then this is kind of near my house, this neat bridge that's all graffitied up, and star trails, over that. And on these examples, you're going to see all the plain trails. Life's too short to remove them. It just takes a long time. Maybe someday I will if I go to print them, but here's one that was taken recently in New Jersey, that we went out over water. And this was, I think this was only about 20 minutes because we were out, I don't know, it was almost 2 in the morning or something, 12:52. And then this was the World War II bunker in Cape May, that a bunch of us went out one night, and this ran for about an hour. And if you're not pointing north, so this is, again, if you haven't ever done it, when you get those concentric circles, you're pointing to the north. But if you have them kind of sideways like that, you're pointing off, maybe east or west. This is down at a marina in New Jersey. I mean, there's so many. This is like Atlantic City planes coming and going. And then Aztec Island at the famous shack.
This is a feature that you believe is only available on Olympus?
I know that it's only available on Olympus. I don't know if it's like patented or trademarked, so I don't know if other people could add it. But so far, no one has. So Olympus has several computational features built in. Another one of those is a neutral density filter built in. So without putting filters on, it'll take several images and it'll make it look like a 6-stop or a 10-stop neutral density filter. And the newest camera now has a graduated neutral density that's built in. So the computer in the camera does it.
Wow.
No other camera has those features. And they're less expensive and they're tiny and light. So yeah, it's all pluses for me. Now, if you want, so you don't want star trails, so you're going to be less than 30 seconds. How long to get sharp stars will be dependent on what lens you use. In this case, my 11mm that was on a crop sensor Canon, 25 seconds gave me mostly sharp stars, and that's how we captured the Milky Way. And I believe a shooting star, although that could be a satellite. And then same night, same area, we were hoping for the northern lights and we got them. This is in northern Michigan. This is Point Betsy Lighthouse. And it's one of the darker areas. So also long exposures, smoothing out the water. So here's Boathouse Row. We went down one night. This was during Christmas, and just using a long exposure kind of stilled it all out to give that nice glossy reflection. In this shot, in my mind's eye, I did not see that the water bubbles were making this streak, but at 20 seconds, I just thought that was so cool. So you kind of have like these leading lines where it kind of comes in from here. You got a little bit of a swirly right here, and then it kind of leads you up in there and straight to the museum. So just using, this longer exposure lets you get all that motion in the water and pick up a good reflection from kind of flattening it out. Waterfall up at Great Falls National Park, Patterson, New Jersey. Again, a long exposure and just gives you the water bubbles like as the leading lines in the image. So this was almost a full minute. This was with neutral density filters before I switched to Olympus. And another one. I just love the look of that. So you could, just do a slower exposure, but a nice long one gives you that motion from the water. And even here, there's a lot of, this is under the 9th Street Bridge in Ocean City, New Jersey. And there's a lot of motion going on there, but using a longer exposure, so 10 seconds here, caused the water to kind of flatten out and give a nice reflection. And I believe the bridge is lit every night and the lights keep changing. And I had seen a picture of this once and loved it. So whenever I'm there and I'm there at night, we try and go there and shoot it. Here's another example of why using a long exposure can be kind of cool. So I'm standing out in a pouring down rain. The sky is lighting up. I want pictures of it. If you look closely, you see how this is kind of like almost ghosty water. And that's because it is just pouring down there. But using a 10-second exposure kind of makes that soft. And the same here, just pointing a little further down. This is 20 seconds. Again, stilling out the water. Washington Monument, long exposure before sunrise. So you can get that nice reflection. Duck kind of landed and sat still for me, which was a bonus. Havre de Grace. So you guys are probably close to that. I don't know my geography all that well, but that's a real neat area. Wanted a nice shot with a pier, did a 6-second exposure, kind of flattened it out. This was up at that same Point Betsy lighthouse, and the waves are just crashing there. Longer exposure, just kind of smooths them all out. And it really is that turquoise color. So that's something that I just really like, is to smooth out the water. I just think it gives a little more impact to the images. If your clouds aren't moving, then they will be, rendered kind of like the eye sees. If your clouds are moving, then they will also kind of blur. As you can see in this image. So you've got some motion from them blowing. The fountain show at the Bellagio, just the beautiful reflections there. And at the shore, 20 seconds, you get that nice ghosty effect.
Is that Ocean City?
This is Ocean City, Maryland. Atlantic City. And this was like, there was almost no light left. I'm just doing a really long exposure. It's kind of being lit from the boardwalk, and there's a amusement pier, steel pier right to my right. 60 seconds, and it just kind of really softens it up. So it's just different. Same here. Cape May, what's left of that shipwreck. And again, just doing those longer exposure gives you that little bit of ghosty water, little eerie. And then another good subject besides, flattening out water or making that still is car trails. So the same time that I did the Boathouse Row, we were down in Center City, and they had a Ferris wheel up at Christmas time. And then we had some cars, and I was so like, the lights would only go one way or the other, and it was pretty hard to get traffic coming both ways, which was what I was really hoping for. Going a different side of, this is the courthouse, right? So we get the car trails on both sides, standing in the middle. I think I'm on Broad Street, I think. This is the Masonic Temple right there. And I love lights. I love colored lights, holiday stuff. Then a bus went by, so you see these higher lights up here. Now this is also live composite. So I was in Texas, I was at the Riverwalk, and I knew that the boats that are on the water, they all had different colored lights on. And so I set up a live composite. So it was 4 seconds to get a good exposure at blue hour, to get a good exposure of the buildings and, the foreground and everything. And then I just let it run, and I let it keep running until I had color in almost every part of the water. So I'm just watching this build. And the friend that I'm with, she's using her Nikon, and she's not getting anything like this, because if you do a really long exposure, what's going to happen? Your buildings are going to burn out. I don't remember, but I think this was 2 to 5 minutes because the boats are going pretty constantly. You can see motion from the stars that were starting to come out, even in downtown San Antonio. And then a little kid was waving some little light thing that he had. And I thought he was going to ruin my picture when I saw him go by, but it turned out to be kind of cool. Here's another one where I left it run for less time. And so I didn't have, as many boat lights. And then amusement parks. So I love playing at amusement parks. I'm terrified anymore to go on rides, but I like to play with motion. So here's just the Ferris wheel at sunset, not even moving. I think they're loading it. You can use 4 seconds, but now once that thing starts going, now I want to use a slower shutter speed and I want to show that motion. So at 3 seconds, it looks like it's just gonna fly off its little axis there. Up at, oh, all of a sudden I can't think of the name, park up north, that little paratrooper at a 1/6 of a second, you get the nice blur as that moves. Knobles, that's where it was. This was, just, I like to line up where if I can get more than one amusement ride in the picture. So this swing is the yo-yo, and then this, it's not even, and the Ferris wheel that time. This was some other weird ride that just spins around and blinks, which is why you have those little dots. And it just really takes playing around with shutter speed to see what you like the best. If you go too long, then everything might be a blur. Also, most of the rides have blinking lights and that are changing. So if you leave it go too long, all your colors will kind of get muddy and either become white or like a brownish. So you kind of have to find that balance where you're still retaining the colors and getting a good amount of motion. Here's some other thing that's just kind of spinning all around. Swings. And if you're using a smaller aperture, you can get some neat star bursts in your lights. It's one of those things that goes up and down and spins around. And, a lot of times on the amusement rides, it takes time till the ride gets in motion and it's going to stay in motion. So you'll end up with shots maybe that aren't that good. Keep an eye on what this ride looks like here on the left, because there'll be some other shots once it gets in motion. Look how cool that looks once it gets moving. It's almost like spirograph. I have no idea what this ride was. It was the first time I saw it. This was just a couple weeks ago, but it turned out pretty cool.
Where were these rides?
So this is Kimberton Fair, which is Phoenixville. And it's just a little fair, but they have fireworks. So I always go on fireworks night, which I'll show you some examples. So I can get fireworks and the fair rides. So here's that ride that you saw earlier, and it wasn't completely spinning around. So you only got this half circle and some blur. And then here my shutter speed, even at 13 seconds, it wasn't, the ride wasn't going completely around. I think they were still stopping, so I didn't get a complete circle. But then finally, when it got spinning, then I got the whole effect. So you just kind of keep shooting, but you really want it when it's going to be in continuous motion. And then I just keep shooting and keep shooting as the colors change, because you never know what you're going to like the best. Fun with whatever the supernova is, this thing that looks like a top and is constantly changing colors and spinning. I love this ride. This is where you're kind of sitting, you're standing against the thing holding on, and you're getting spun around till you want to throw
You
up.
love it. You love it as long as you don't have to ride on it, right?
As long as I don't have to ride it, I am sure I would probably not do well on it. But I love to photograph it. So anytime that I know there's going to be fireworks at a carnival, any kind of amusement thing, I want to pick that night because I love having the motion of the rides with the fireworks. And I'm a big, if you follow me, which I hope some of you will on Facebook, I love fireworks. I'm a block from the Reading Phillies. So every time they're home, I walk down right before the end of the game and shoot fireworks outside. And I do that in a bunch of different ways. But you're just trying to figure out where they're going to set off the fireworks and get some amusement rides in there and shoot. I love the big Ferris wheels and using a super wide angle and getting right up underneath. And again, shoot every color, shoot as it changes. And it doesn't get old to me. I just think that's so cool. And again, these are things you don't see with your eyes. You're creating this. This is your art. Now
That's cool.
so the next dimension, and you could do, and you probably have already done, or you have a presentation coming up on ICM or intentional camera movement. But eventually when I'm doing rides, I'll get a little bored. And so I start zooming and playing. So this is a long exposure. So I'm getting the motion, but then I'm zooming as well. And so this is just one of those swing rides. This is Ocean City, New Jersey. And then I zoomed and then really zoomed. And in this one, I might have gone in and out. And I never really know what I do. Like this, I zoomed, I think, just a little at a time. So you see this sort of stagger step. Because you can play around a lot when you have 8 seconds going on. You just want to be careful that you're not blowing out your highlights. This is all white, so there's nothing you can do about that. But you want to be able to see all your colors. And then the Ferris wheel, eventually I'll get bored and I'll start zooming in and out with that as well. And you can get some really cool shots, in my opinion. Zoom in all the way, just zoom a little bit. And then, as an added
Wow.
bonus, last year we were waiting for the fireworks and we had a killer storm and there was lightning everywhere and they kept the rides running. And half of our group, we had like a meetup for a camera club. Half of them said, "This is insane. I'm going home, going to be safe." But a few of us stayed and kept shooting. And we just were doing, I had it set on time lapse. So it was just continuously shooting at 6-second exposures. And I did get a couple bursts of lightning.
That was a nice bonus.
Yeah, it was. It was a nicer bonus that I didn't die. So I get electrocuted because the voice was, the red flags were going off.
Yeah.
And when I was in Texas, I was in Austin and we went down to photograph the city skyline. And there was a huge storm that had come through, but it was not, there was just lightning at this point, but no rain. And so there were some bolts going off behind the city, which was pretty cool. Again, I just set the camera for time lapse and let it keep shooting. Because if you're trying to time it, and I don't have one of those lightning triggers or anything, you'll never catch it. And then I heard you guys mention fire spinning. So I love that. I've only ever gone on a workshop that these guys in Delaware County do. So I've paid Vault to have them spinning it and they do some big things. Because I'd love to lead a workshop, but I have yet to find a place where I won't set anything on fire, I won't get arrested, and I won't cause like a traffic accident from people seeing it. So if you guys, know of any good places that fit that, like, and especially over water, you said you're going, I think, over water, that's perfect. So here's just another thing to shoot. I mentioned earlier, getting down there, cloud motion. So this was a long exposure of a male pouch barn. There was a little bit of a breeze and the clouds, you just have a little softness to them. And here's a nice series for you to get an idea. So we went here for a sunset and we really didn't get one because it was so cloudy. This is 1/8 of a second. You can see like the clouds, you have some detail in the sky. Oops. I got them out of order. 1.3 second, you have a little bit more motion. Now 20 seconds, and you almost can't tell. There's just these streaks, and because it's all white, they're almost invisible. And one at 15. And then even this one where it was very windy as I was photographing this cross, 25 seconds, and they just softened out. And then a lot of Olympus people shoot cloud motion in live composite. I personally don't like it. It looks very choppy and unnatural, but here I tried it one day. This is at Batstow Village, a historic place in New Jersey, Pine Barrens. And so this was a series of 20-second exposures. Again, I don't remember how long I left it run, but it's daylight and I'm leaving the camera run for probably about a minute. And so the foreground isn't getting overexposed at all, but the motion is being recorded. And if you've never heard of that, like just Google it, live composite in Olympus, and you'll get probably a little better description than maybe I've given tonight. But just here's another one, long exposure and the nice motion in the clouds. And now, as I'm wrapping up here, so water is another thing that I love to photograph, again, in all different shutter speeds. So one morning I was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I'm at a river, and I just decided to play with shutter speeds. I'm on a tripod. What you're seeing here is the gold is the reflection of orangish yellow leaves on the bank, and they're being hit by sunlight, but the water itself is in shade. And that blue you're seeing is then the reflection of the sky. So there are a bunch of faster shutter speeds, and I thought they looked just stupid and terrible, so they're not included. But
Your
starting at
microphone's fading in
That's
and
what
out.
I found.
Am I here? Am I okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're
Yeah.
doing fine.
I can.
Okay. All right. So at a 40th of a second, you start to see some motion, but I don't think that's a very nice rendition of anything. Slowing it down a little, and now it's getting some waves and a little softer. At 25th, that's kind of pretty. And here around a 13th of a second, if you follow John Barclay at all, and he talks about your heart singing, here's where my heart started to sing, that I just thought it was so beautiful with the wave action. So around a 13th or a 10th, I was getting these soft waves, the nice reflections, the picture that you see behind me. Please do not even judge all that dust on that sensor. Oh my word, it's terrible. But around a 1/5 of a second, it was just beautiful and soft. And so whenever I'm, out in the fall, I try and recreate this scenario. And again, the shutter speeds won't exactly match what you might do. It just depends on how fast the water is moving in the river there. So I used to always shoot water really slow and get the nice blur, but shooting water at about a 15th of a second, you get that kind of spritz without it being frozen. This is up in the Upper Peninsula as well. And then here at a 1/6 of a second, you still have texture in the water instead of like the really long exposures where it's just kind of a ghosted image. So I really like that 1/6 of a second in this case. In Oregon, standing on the shoreline, Cannon Beach, waiting for the waves to rescind. So at an 1/8 of a second, you get this nice, lines from the waves. Too long and you wouldn't see that at all. And then again, just some examples of swirlies. This I had a neutral density on so I could get down to 20 seconds. This is at Bushkill Falls and it's full sun. 64 seconds, which is almost too long. See how it's really getting kind of ghosted and muddy and it's hard to tell what's going on. 30 seconds. If there aren't a lot of water bubbles and there aren't a lot of leaves, you almost won't see anything no matter how long your shutter speed is. If you ever go to Ricketts Glen, I know that's a little bit of a drive for you guys. That's just a premier place for waterfalls. This waterfall at Watersmeet has the swirlies, which anywhere from maybe 15 seconds on. And then just, you don't have to do really long. Here's just some different examples. Waterfalls at different shutter speeds. Long, longer. I really like this cotton candy effect here in this area in Oregon. and long enough, this was really rushing right here, so it got very ghosted. But here at a 1/4 second, you're maintaining the texture in the water. And I believe that was it. So how'd I do? I don't know. Oh, and a little over an hour. So I didn't remember whether you said an hour or an hour and a half.
Actually, we didn't say.
Oh, well then there you go. So usually
was
it's
an
about an
excellent-
hour. What's that?
It was an excellent program.
thank you.
Really loved it. And I
Thank
like
you,
the fact that she used Olympus, especially since I just bought the OM1 Mark II.
Oh, there you go. You're gonna love it. So yeah,
Well, I've
feel
been
free to.
using Olympus for quite a few years now. I really do like it. It has some great features to the cameras that you don't see in others.
Exactly. Like I always liked my Canon, but I never loved, I could say that I love it. Like I would not switch out. It would be an earth-shattering thing to get me to switch now because I just love the features. I love the quality, and the OM1 Mark II is better in noise. I'm just leaving this here in case anybody else has any questions before I unshare. Did anybody have any questions about any images, or were you specifically, or were you asking as you went?
Is your Olympus, is that a mirrorless or DSLR?
Mirrorless.
Yep. And you can get into Olympus and have the computational features starting in the entry level, which is under $1,000 for like a camera and 2 lenses. That has the live composite. So that's how I did all those star trails. Cause I like to see, I want to know when I can, like, I have enough trails and I can go home and go to bed now. Instead of just guessing. Cause, if you, you stop too soon, like you maybe let it run an hour, but it wasn't long enough. Well, you stopped your image, right? Because you couldn't see it if you're with any other camera. So it's just helpful. I'll usually run 2 cameras and I'll do one on time lapse and do individual shots because the problem, here's an example. If a car comes by, so I'm standing, my back's to the road, a car's headlights could ruin the shot because this is just one exposure. So that's where it's a little risky if you just run a camera for an hour or 2 hours. So I'll usually have 2 cameras going just in case.
Both Olympus?
Yes. I have 3 at the moment. I have the entry level one. And then while I was shooting it for waterfalls, because I got it just to hike at Ricketts because I'm older and out of shape, and that's a really tough hike, carrying food and water and everything else. But standing in the middle of a stream as I'm almost falling in, I figured I am going to kill this camera because it was not weather sealed. So then I bought the EM1 Mark III, which you could get right now for probably $500, I think, for the body. And I loved that camera. But I went to Norway 2 years ago and I felt like I had to have a newer one. And so I had gotten the OM1 Mark I, and then I ended up with the 2 and sold the 1. So.
Anybody else out there?
Fantastic production. You give me a lot of things to work on.
Oh, thanks. So I didn't bring my, if I can have a second yet.
Sure. Take your time.
I meant to have a screen up with my contact information, which I would love if anybody was interested in following me. A lot of times there'll be funny stories attached to my images. Inevitably, I get in trouble doing something, or
Yeah, you
just
might want,
fun
I'll
stuff.
yeah, share your Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah. So this is me on Facebook. You don't need to ask to be my friend, and I don't post food pictures, but you could see a bunch of, there'll be a bunch of bugs. And here's the other way that I do fireworks. If you've ever heard of focus pull, I was going to
Oh, yeah.
include that, but that could be its own class. So you start, when the burst goes up, you start out of focus and then quickly turn it in as it opens. And you want a really wide aperture. So I have circular polarizer and an ND filter on so I can be at f4, and you get these really neat blobby blurry, cool
Mm.
things. It's just, it's a
Yeah.
neat
They're kind of
way.
like
So,
flowers. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, they're great. So you
Yeah,
start
it's-
wide and then go in,
no. You start out of focus
out of
and jerk
focus?
it into focus. And you really want a lens that has a hard stop. Like some of the new mirrorless lenses, you can just keep, even if you're in manual focus, they just keep spinning. So you don't know where to stop for macro and, infinity. So the lenses that I'm using are the pro lenses for Olympus that have a hard stop when I'm focusing. If that
Oh,
makes
okay.
sense. Like I can only turn so far and then it stops. Otherwise you can't do it. Like it would be really hard.
Is Olympus the only one that has that hard stop?
No. My old Canon lenses had it. It's just, you have to watch with a lot of the mirrorless lenses. I forget what they call it. String focus or something, but they don't. They just keep spinning. And I don't actually know why they did that. But here's
Sorry, I know the answer to that. It's called fly-by-wire.
okay.
And I don't know the full reason why they did it, but I imagine it might just be easier for some lenses that have variable apertures based on if it's like a zoom lens,
Right.
but I'm not fully certain.
Yeah, so I definitely don't like it at all.
Love you too, babe.
But so I'm on Instagram as well. And I hate notifications, so I don't have them on, but here I am. Where am I? So I'd love if anybody wants to follow me, if anybody comes up this way and is interested in
Just did.
workshops. Awesome, thank you.
Mhm.
And I'm always like, feel free to send me, like I was talking with Michael earlier. I've wanted to go to that bike race. What's it called again?
The clustered spires, high wheel
Yeah.
race.
And I can promise you I could get a friend of mine on. For 3 years in a row in the wintertime, we've talked about going to Carroll Park to get the boats lit up and everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
And
we
I've-
just did
and
that
I've
a
never
week or
made
so
it
ago.
yet.
Yep.
Because I kind of wanted a snow also, but it
Uh-huh.
doesn't snow. So down
Well,
there.
actually,
So
that happens late November. They open it up. It's called
Through.
Sailing into Solstice. And
Yeah.
it runs
And
from late
they have it through
November.
March. Yeah.
Yeah, and
But I
no,
just
actually,
never.
they pull them down in mid-January.
Well, guys, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I love to do the opportunity to meet new people and do presentations. So I'd love to keep in touch with any of you that would love to keep in touch, especially people that have drunk the Olympus Kool-Aid.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
good
thank
night.
you.
Thank you, guys. You've been
Thanks,
great.
Valerie.
Appreciate you.
Take
Thanks,
care of yourselves.
Gene. All right, take care, everybody. Hope to see you again soon.
Bye.